afternoon, we have Adam Vane for us. Adam is managing partner of Paragon Global Consulting, boutique firm in Manhattan. His expertise has been quoted in Bloomberg and Tribune Media. For over 15 years, he's delivered customized training programs and executive coaching to CEOs of Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies, large businesses, and corporate executives, helping us, to break through upper limits to see the strategies realized more quickly. Adam has specific expertise in helping leaders and executive teams become more cohesive and focused on strategy execution as opposed to struggling with communication roadblocks. He speaks internationally to members of YPO, Vistage, and the United Nations. Adam is an adjunct instructor for the Department of Organization and Change at New York University, is a mentor coach and examiner for aspiring coaches in the Columbia Coaching Certification Program. His pro bono work has involved mediating disputes between gang leaders and members of the local community of the Bronx. So without further ado, let's welcome, please, Adam Vane.
Thanks so much. So can everybody hear me? So we spent the morning learning about communication styles, had a wonderful time. It was really a lot of fun, wasn't it? So now it's really time to apply that learning to our lives. And in order to do that, we're going to be a little more interactive this afternoon. And I'll be calling on you to really think about your own situations. And I think some of you were given a homework, I think all of you were given a homework assignment to bring in a difficult conversation. But if not, don't worry, I'm going to be giving you an exercise to do that. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I got here. So I started in a YPO-like business. It was a family business, good-sized business. And it's the classic. How many people here are in or have been in a family business before? Okay, nice number of people. So I'm the classic story of the youngest son who they say, okay, go off to university, learn, and then come back and teach. And what happens when you actually bring all those ideas back into the organization? They don't want to hear them, right? So after about 10 years of managing a lot of complex interpersonal interactions, and it's a pretty good-sized company, things got so intense that between me and the older generation that there was a day when my brother almost had to separate my father and I from like getting into a fist fight. And so I figured, I think I'm going to take my expertise somewhere else. So I actually, because of the tension, wrote a musical about the exploitation of Native Americans that was a reflection of my family dynamic at the time. Got a scholarship to New York. And not because I wasn't interested in writing for theater at all. I went to Columbia University and got my degree in organization development, leadership development, and conflict management. So my internship involved, as you heard, going up into the Bronx and mediating disputes between gang leaders and members of the local community. That's how I cut my teeth. Over time, as I began to get more private sector clients, I still kept my hand in the public sector. And so what I do now, most of my work is private sector work, but the small part, the part that I think is probably interesting to some of you, is that I train people from 85 different countries how to negotiate with rebel separatists in countries like Afghanistan, the Sudan, and Algeria. So what we're talking about here is difficult conversations. And having talked to a lot of CEO peer advisory groups over the years, there are a lot of lenses of leadership. So you've got strategic planning, and you've got marketing, and you've got law, and you've got public relations. But when you sit in those all-day meetings, what you find that they spend 80% of their time talking about is difficult conversations. And by difficult conversations, a difficult conversation is any conversation that you have that gives you sort of a funny feeling in the stomach, right? Like you know you need to have this conversation, but something stops you. And then you end up staying up at night thinking about it. And I don't even have to ask, because I know everybody in this room either has had one or has one right now that's keeping them up. because I've been doing it long enough, right? It's just, there's a funny feeling in your stomach. It's just a feeling in the pit of your stomach. Like, I know I need to have it, but something's stopping me. And that is the stress that Dave was talking about this morning. It turns out that those difficult conversations are very costly to organizations. How costly? The last large study was done in 2008 by consulting psychologist Press. The number of people that they interviewed in this study was 5,000 people around the world. The numbers underneath are just the numbers in the US. So the annual cost of difficult conversations in the US was $360 billion in paid hours, 385 million working days. And if you look at if you dig down into the statistics, you'll see where some of this comes from. So 80% of the people from the survey experienced conflict with other departments and teams. Now, I know nobody in here has ever experienced any conflict with another department or team. But somewhere else, that's happening a lot. 65% said there were too many cooks in the kitchen and there's confusion about who's doing what. 40% said communication with organizational leadership is ineffective, meaning that as I begin to send out my message as a leader, it turns out that it's just like the game of telephone. Every layer down, it begins to lose its efficacy and its meaning, until by the time it reaches the lower level, it's something completely different. And 25% said just trying to avoid conflict kills morale and causes illness and absence from work. Does this make sense to people? Just nod your head. That seems like it's true. So, in doing work, I found that the kind of training programs that I bring into organizations around difficult conversations fall in 4 different areas. And the first is poor peer management. And peer management is when you're at the same level as someone else, right? Someone is your peer, and there's difficult conversation like, how do I talk to that person? And we could do a whole training on that today, but we're not. The next is poor meeting management, and that's how do I manage the difficult conversations that happen in groups? How many people here have to facilitate meetings as part of their job? They have to get results out of groups. So you've probably noticed one of the things that comes up is you may have one person taking up a lot of the airtime and 3 people are being silent, and you know that that's not working. But what do? Am I rude? Do I interrupt? So there's a whole skill set around facilitating results in groups. Number 3 is poor managing up and out. And that is some of the CEOs in the room experience that, believe it or not. You, some of the associates here, some of the key members may experience that when you're managing up. Like, how do I actually speak the truth, right, to my boss? Or some of you may have the issue that the CEOs have if you're managing people, which is, how do I get them to speak the truth to me? Do you know what I mean? Like, I really want them to be honest with me, but as you learn from Dave, there may be something that you're unaware of that you're doing that prevents them from doing it, because they have their own delusions, they have their own set of stress indicators. You unknowingly may be triggering those, so you can't get the truth. That's a whole other skill set. That's not what we're going to be talking about. What we're going to be talking about is performance management, where you have a level of authority and now you have to give some feedback to someone. So if you ever had a situation where you had someone who reported to you and you had to give feedback, or say at home when you have a level of authority, maybe with kids, although I can tell you teenagers, it's not easy to do it with, but we can certainly talk about. That's what we're going to be talking about. Okay? So I want to start with a story. And it's a true story, and my client Dan gave me permission to tell the story. So Dan was someone, we call him the talented CEO. He's someone who made his first $1 million in college. It's pretty good, right? And he began, through a series of startups, to have, he always made it to $1 million with each startup and moved to the next one. This guy is one of the most magnetic people that you've ever met. There's something almost guru-like about him. He just draws people to him. He's an incredible listener, right? He really wants to know how you feel about something. People would kill for this guy. He's also very business savvy, and he's very innovative. Can you guess which style is his primary style? He's a good listener. So this is going to be a little more interactive, so you can call it out. So what do you think his, so he really is a great listener, and people are attracted to his warmth. What's that? He's a romantic, right? Or in my model, he's a relator. He really can relate to people, and people feel seen by him. Okay, so that all sounds good. What's the problem? The problem for him was he said, you know, I get to $1 million, and when it comes time to really pushing results through people, sometimes it's hard for me to really pull those results out of people. So I could use some help, and I'm noticing that my team could use some help in that. Like, how do we really pull results out of people without running over them like the typical warrior? So the question he raised was, how do we develop our leadership capacity across and down the organization so we make sure that critical feedback is communicated to create a culture of accountability and productivity? So we did some work over 3 years. And the way we did the work was come in and do 2 hours in the morning on one of those 4 conversations. So imagine you're sitting there and someone comes in and talks to you, just like we did it today, except just 2 hours in the morning with your executive team, and you're talking about one of these conversations, and you're learning some of these things like you learned this morning. Then in the afternoon, each person got a 30-minute coaching session to kind of personalize it. Like, you know how this morning you got some ideas, but then what do I actually do with it? So we had 30-minute coaching sessions so people could begin to learn. And then in those coaching sessions, all the issues that typically come up for an executive team were spoken to me so that I, next month, could bring in and talk about those issues in the group. So then, as the group became more skilled at executing around these difficult conversations, the subject matter became introduced in the general session. What happened was everybody got more comfortable. Now you would think, so that sounds really good. What does that have to do with business? Sounds like you had a really happy group. Well, here's what happened after 3 years. Dan and his team took his company from $1 million company to achieve, and this is true, this happened just a month ago, it was announced. They made number 468 on the Inc. 5000 with 990% annual income growth over 3 years. They added 80 jobs, and they went from 1 million to 15.5 million. So there's something about the execution around difficult conversations that can really happen in organizations. It isn't just a statistic from a 2008 study. And that's what we want to focus on today. Now, the first thing in performance management we need to remember is we want to know how to give positive feedback because we want to leverage people's strengths. So if you're a leader, a great exercise for you to do would be to go realize, you know, people need to know that what they do matters to you. And so a great exercise would be for you to write down, and if we have time today, we'll do that. Write down the people on your team that report to you and think, how can I communicate to them that what they do matters to me? I mean, how would it be for you if your boss came up and said, you know, here's something I specifically appreciated about what you do? Would you be offended? No, feel pretty good, right? Yeah. So that would be a great exercise, but that's not what we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to review the PGC communication styles model that you all have on your handout. And you're going to notice that those 4 styles map onto the 4 styles that Dave talked about this morning. I'm going to teach you 3 guardrails for giving performance feedback, which would also apply to your personal life. Then we're going to go through the 7 steps of giving performance feedback, recognizing there's no absolute truth in leadership. So what I say, it doesn't mean every sentence I say is absolutely true for each one of you. You have to bring your own wisdom to the conversation. But what I want to do is provide you sort of guardrails to keep you safe and then guideposts for guiding you forward. And then you'll bring yourself to that. And what will really work well, see, here's my assertion. My assertion is you are 5 minutes away from a breakthrough in understanding and the most difficult conversation that's keeping you up at night right now, personal and professional. 5 minutes away from a breakthrough. Why would I say that? Because one of the first things you learn as a mediator up in the Bronx, where you're dealing with issues of violence, like for example, one of my mediations was someone going in and shooting out the lights in the building and the mother of his ex-girlfriend, and she's seeking an order of protection. Yeah. And each one of these mediations, you realize, oh my God, the solution is right there in front of them and they don't see it. And what Dave gave you a hint of this morning was, wow, there's stuff, I'm in delusion, there's something I'm not seeing. So what we want to do now is look and see, how do I break through that delusion to begin to reach out and make a difference? And I'm saying, wow, you're 5 minutes away. 5 minutes. Now, it may take you 2 years how to learn how to get to that 5 minutes, but you're all 5 minutes away. And to prove that, I'm going to invite you to bring into the room whatever difficult conversation around performance feedback that you have going on, and you just bring that in and we'll talk about it, and let's see how long it takes for you to have a breakthrough in understanding. That is something that could make this a very powerful session for people. So I invite that from you. Okay? So, we're going to do a little review. If you could just write down for driver, what do you think driver is? Warrior. What do you think expressive is? And write it down, write his, because you've been speaking a particular language all day. So do you have a handout? Can we have another handout up here, please? Anybody else not have a handout? Oh, we've got 1, 2, so just raise your hands. Kathleen will bring it up to you. So write down warrior by driver, and by expressive, you're going to write down mastermind. What do you think relator is? Romantic. And then what do you think analytical is? Expert. Okay, so now we have it mapped. Now, as Dave was beautifully and with a lot of humor explaining how these different styles work, we also need to learn, how do we recognize them quickly? I mean, don't you think that'd be useful? To learn, how do I quickly assess what's someone's style? And here's how you do it. So, there are 2 axes here that you're going to be paying attention to. The vertical axis is someone more assertive? Are they someone who tells, meaning they speak quickly? Right? They tend to speak quickly and loudly. That continuum. And then asks, which is they tend to speak a little more slowly and softly. Right? Write that down so you can remember, because you're going to want to use this as a tool going forward. Right above the word tells, you write speaks quickly and a little more loudly and more definitely, and that's the assertiveness. And then asks, you'd write down speaks a little more slowly, right, and a little more softly. And then the horizontal axis has to do with responsiveness, the degree to which someone shows affect. Affect means emotions. So on the one side, you see if someone controls emotion, it means when they're talking like this, right? There's no emotion, there's very little affect on their face. Okay? Do you know what I mean? Like there's a little bit, as opposed to someone who's really emoting and like talking like this, and you can just hear in their tone of voice, there's a lot of tonality and there's a lot in their facial expressions. This is something you can see, and within just a few minutes, especially if you were in sales, people who are in sales, pay attention, because you can very quickly assess someone's style and begin to mirror and influence them in the first 90 seconds. Okay, so that's emotion, controls emotion versus someone who emotes. Everybody has emotions, it's just how much they show them on their facial expressions and tone of voice. So we start with the warrior driver, right? And as Dave said, that's someone who values action and results. Right? Their motto is, come on people, let's get it done now. Come on, let's go. Brandon, we don't have time. Come on, let's get it done now. Right? That is the driver/warrior. The expressive is someone who's more the salesperson, the more the charm person. So you see now this person also speaks loudly, but now they're speaking fast because they may be in sales or they may be in marketing and they really want to talk a lot. They talk a lot. And what are they talking about? What are they talking about? Themselves. Right? Oh, that reminds me of me. Let me tell you a story about, right? They have this internal dialogue that's always going on, and that's where they're moving to. So they express a lot of emotion, they're talking real fast. If they're also showing emotion, but now they're speaking a little bit slower, they're more the related romantic. How are you? Hey, can I get you a cup of coffee? Danielle, how are you today? Nice to see you. Right? So these are people that value relationships and security. They're very dependable. They're very open. They're very concerned about the effect on people. And then if someone's also talking slowly, but there's low affect, in other words, they're saying, so I really want to talk to you about this report that I did, because I think you may have missed some of the data on the report. Then you're talking about the analytical or the expert. Very serious, exacting, and logical. So the motto is, let's get it right the first time. So what happens when you put these together, right? Because you notice that each one has their strengths and challenges, and Dave was great about talking about the strengths and challenges. But the driver and the relator, as you can see, are the farthest apart. And that is probably where you're going to have the biggest issue. Because what I think Dave explained to you is, you have all 4 of these styles within you, right? He called it a toolbox. All 4 of them within you, and you tend to have a primary and a secondary. But the one at the bottom of the toolbox, the person who has that as their primary style is going to be the person you're going to have the biggest problems with at work. So, for the driver, that's the relator. So typically, with the driver is moving very quickly. But who's the relator in the room? Who's someone who was a romantic, identified as a romantic, and what's your name?
Tony.
Tony. So if I'm a driver and I say, Tony, you know, I don't have a lot of time, you gotta get that, what's wrong with you? Now I walk away, 5 minutes later, I have completely forgotten about the comment and I am fine with Tony. 6 months later, Tony is still thinking about that comment, right? So that's the tension in between the driver and the relator. Between the expressive and the analytical, the tension is the expressive likes approval and spontaneity. So they're really looking for affect. We all do what we know, right? The analytical or the expert is someone who has bigger boundaries. So if I'm talking fast with someone who has low affect and is really worried about data, who do we know here that is an analytical? Just need to raise the hand. Right, what's your name? Michael. So Michael, if I'm an expressive, if I'm a mastermind, I've got this idea, Michael, I've got this great idea, and I'm going to share it with you. And now I'm going to start moving close to Michael, which is really moving into his boundaries, and that's not cool, right? Because analyticals tend to have bigger boundaries. Now, I am going to start talking about this great idea that I have. Now, the detail part, going to be a bit of a challenge for me, right? Because that's just the way it is for the expressives. Whereas that's what he's interested in. So as I begin to talk, as the stress begins to happen, he begins to shut down, his affect gets lower. Now, here's the problem. Under stress, we do more of what we know. So as I see him, he's shutting down, I think, oh, he's not getting it. Therefore, I need to be even bigger with him, right? He shuts down, I get bigger. See the tension? Okay, so that's what happens, and that's the way these styles interact. And each one has its strengths and challenges. So the first exercise I'm going to give you is on the page right behind this front page. And I assume you may have gotten it as a pre-assignment, so if you brought a difficult conversation with a report in, you can use that. But if not, what I want you to do is to identify a situation in which you gave performance feedback that wasn't well received and write down what happened. Or, the second choice is identify a situation in which you need to give performance feedback now to someone that reports to you or a child. What barriers are you experiencing in giving that performance feedback? Now, I know that the drivers/warriors in the room have already finished that exercise and they're already on number 2. Okay, so just know you can't do number 2 because you see what it says? It says, after you go through the 7 steps, write it down. So I know you think you know how drivers, but just hang on. We actually have to get through the 7 steps. So just do the first part. Do the first part, which is choice A or choice B. Write about one of those situations on the handout. And when you're done, I'm going to ask you to turn to a partner and share. So first, write down a few notes so you bring this to mind. See, this is very different from being on stage. This is about your life. So we're now really looking, because it's time to get real. Because the only way to learn how to do this is to get real. And my goal is to begin to pull some realizations out of you. Because I am not at all in a belief that your lives will completely transform after my presentation. But what I do know is you will walk away with one strategy, at least one. I'm going to give you plenty. But you're going to walk away with at least one strategy that you're going to put into practice in your life, and it will make a difference. And if you study this, you'll get even better. And practice it, you'll get even better. But you will leave with one. That is a promise. If not, come find me afterwards. And again, we'll talk about it. But for now, do this exercise. Some of you in the odd rows may have to turn behind you. And the expert analytic is saying, can I just do this by myself? I can figure it out. And the drivers are still a larger group. Is everybody in their reality now?
Right.
Fun time's over, right? This is the real thing.
Right.
So, I want to go over those 3 guardrails, and we'll go over the 7 steps, take questions, and then we'll have a chance to practice. So, the first thing we need to talk about is where these difficult conversations start. They start with a position. Now, a position is just a way to look at something. Like, I'm taking a position. Does everybody know what I mean by position? I'm taking a position on this. Just a way of looking at something. We all have a position all the time. We got some, I have a position I know on what food I like. I have a position on the way work should be done. Newtonian theory states, for every action, there's an equal and opposite. Yes. Right, and I'm here to tell you that for every position you take, there's an equal and opposite position. And here is what that looks like in organizations. Let's say that I see Eric. And the truth is, I was supposed to get Eric an important report for his team, because we both are peers, and I have my team, he has his team, but in fact, my boss Don gave me this hot assignment, and if I, wanted to keep on working for this organization, I better do it. So I forgot to give that report to Eric last week, and now it's this week, and I'm walking through the hall, right, and I'm really busy, I'm looking at my iPad, and I'm, have forgotten, and I look up and go, hey Eric. He says, hey Adam, kind of gives me a look. Now, what would be the right thing to do right now? Eric, I'm so sorry. I meant to get you that report, but Don has that whole Ford Foundation account we were supposed to work for. I didn't get. Look, I screwed up, and if that ever happens again, if I get interrupted for any reason, I can't get you something, I'll let you know within 5 minutes. But man, I'm really, really sorry. It could be the right thing to do. That is not what typically happens. Here's what typically happens, because I'm busy doing my thing, I forgot. Forgot means I forgot. I walk down the hall, I say, hey Eric. He says, hey Adam, kind of gives me a look. And I say to myself, he had a funny sound in his voice, and I keep on walking. Go back to my office. Oh, I remember. What would be the right thing to do right now? Call him on the phone, right? That's not what happens. Here's how we take in information. This is important. The way you take in information first is the oldest part of your brain, and it is called the limbic system. The limbic system of your brain. It's responsible for breathing and survival, but because it's responsible for survival, there's a bit of a me against you, right? And it tends to be negative. So that's the filter for stuff coming in, which is anytime there's a threat. And so the way it comes in, there's like a feeling, a thought, and then I come into some kind of evaluation. I don't want to feel bad about myself. I don't. So let me go and talk to Brendan. Brendan's on my team. Hey, Brendan. We were supposed to get that report to Eric and his team last week. But Don came to us with that assignment and everything that we had to do. You know how Eric is. Oh, I know how Eric is. He begins to make me right. In the meantime, Eric goes over to John, and Eric says, hey, John, Adam was supposed to give us that report last week, but, he never even got it. And I walked down the hall, and he walked right by me, didn't say a thing. He obviously has it in for us. And John says, oh yeah, I know just how Adam is. Begins to make him right. So what starts as an internal conversation because of our limbic system of survival, wanting to protect ourselves, wanting to feel like we're good people. This even comes out of positive intentions. I don't start with bad intentions, but when the stress comes up and the limbic system comes in, the prefrontal cortex responsible for trust and logic shuts down. And then you have position meets position. It escalates in my head. And you have positional escalation. Now, we live in a state of hoping someone, the silver knight's going to come in and save the day, but that's not what happens. Unfortunately, the bad news is that when positions beget positions, they begin to escalate unless you begin to do something about them. So one of the first steps in managing difficult conversations, you want to avoid the positional escalation. Avoid it in you and avoid it in them, because once the defenses go up, I have to spend all my time getting around the defenses. Right? You have to avoid the defensiveness in you and the defensiveness in them, so you avoid positional escalation. Right? And how does this proliferate? Well, what happens when you're in survival mode? What is your brain churning out chemicals for? Fight or flight. It's familiar to you, right? That's the way these difficult conversations begin to escalate. I'm either fighting, I'm flighting, or I'm kind of doing both, attacking and withdrawing.
So Adam.
Yes, question.
Why did you pick up the telephone? Why didn't you walk down the hall to talk to him?
Well, in many cases, that would be the right thing to do. But as we both know, siloing in organizations is a challenge for almost every company. It starts somewhere. So my example is simply to give you how that might occur. Does that make sense? I mean, Adam, I would want to call and apologize, and probably the romantics would want to do that. Oh, I'm really sorry about the report. But somebody else who wants to feel, who feels misunderstood, that's when the defenses go up. We don't live in a perfect world, as you probably know. So what we're trying to understand is how these things happen and what we can do about it. Okay? So that's the first guardrail, avoid positional escalation. The second one is a little bit counterintuitive. It is that people cannot say yes to you without the room and the space to say no. I'll say that again. The people around you cannot say yes to you without the room and the space to say no. But the opposite of that is that when you actually allow for no, you allow for yes. When you allow for no, you allow for yes. And there's something about this, when people really begin to learn how to do this, when you suddenly see that unfold, it is like magic. But it's not easy to understand. I'm going to give you an example just to demonstrate how this operates. So in an organization, when I have, say, a difficult conversation with someone, and they don't want to talk to me, if I walk up to them, it isn't a norm where I say, hey, do you have a second to talk? Right? That they would say no, right? Some people might, but not often. And the first step in a difficult, people often ask me, like, how do I get started? I don't even know how to get started. They're living in fear. They're staying up at night. I don't even know how to get started. The first step is, hey, do you have a minute to talk? Because that's the first question of yes, we're allowing for no. Because you cannot, this is the United States of America, you cannot force people to talk to you. You can't. So you have to say, hey, do you have a minute to talk? So let's say Brendan and I have, and would you role play this with me? Okay. This is just to demonstrate the principle. So let's say you and I have had a difficult conversation, and I want you to role play, sort of really be you. You don't have to be like the worst guy in the world, not the nicest guy in the world, but really experience what you would experience in this situation, okay? All right, so you're going to avoid me. Hey, Brendan, you got a second to talk?
Sure.
Great, now he felt like he wanted to talk to me, so now I want you to avoid me, okay? So how do people say no in organizations if you say, do you have a minute to talk? What do they say? I'm busy, right? I'm busy. So let's try that. Okay. Hey, Brendan, you got a second to talk?
Not right now.
Not right now? You busy?
Yes.
It's a busy time. There's a lot going on. Okay. Checking this afternoon?
I'm back in the office tomorrow. Checking with them.
Okay, tomorrow. Great. I'll check with you tomorrow. Okay, so now what happened? Brendan just made a verbal contract with me, an agreement. Check with me tomorrow. Oftentimes we carry the load of feeling like, I have to make it happen with Brendan. What I want to teach you is how do you make them carry the load? So what I just did was, okay, so I'll talk to you tomorrow. Yeah, no problem. All right, so now it's tomorrow. Hey, Brendan, do you have a second to talk?
Probably this afternoon.
This afternoon? Okay, you're all tied up. All right, no problem. So I'll come in. So now I come in, now it's this afternoon. Now think really about what this would be for you. Think about it. Tune into yourself. Okay? So, hey, Brendan, is this a good time?
I have a conference call in about 10 minutes. I have to get ready for it. Find me after that.
Okay. So in most cases, what usually happens is, because I have a feeling, and I may be wrong, Brendan, but do you notice yourself feeling some internal pressure now to have this conversation?
Yes.
Why do you think that is?
Because you want to have a conversation.
Who wants to have a conversation?
You.
Right. But did I get in the way by being positional? You know, Brendan, we got to have this conversation. No, we don't. Yes, we do. No, we don't. There's your positional escalation. There is something about this principle. When you learn this, it will change your life. So, but let's say he did what he normally the people within 1 or 2 times. But there's something called the power of 3 that I want to explain to you. Okay? So now you said, no, I got a conference, I'm really busy. So Brendan, look, I've come to you 3 times to ask you. I'm getting the sense maybe you don't want to talk.
I'm trying to get to it. I really do.
Okay. So now you see how. Do you notice you felt more pressure?
Yes.
Do you know why you felt more pressure? That's called the power of 3. Here's the power of 3. All of us experienced the number 3. What are some things that are 3 that are pressure? 3 strikes and you're out. Right? But the most important one is when your mom wanted you to do something when you were young, what did she say? 1, 2. Everybody knows what it means to get to 3. But just let's say that he's the toughest guy in the world, and you say, no, I don't want to. So Brendan, I get the sense that you don't say, no, I don't want to talk to you. Brendan, I get the sense that maybe you don't want to talk to me.
No, I don't want to talk.
You don't want to talk to me. Look. This is the United States of America, okay? I can't force him, so here's what I do. So Brendan, I'm the kind of person who, when stuff comes up, I like to talk about it. If you don't, I completely respect that. If you ever do, would you let me know?
I'll let you know.
Okay, great. Walk away. Who now bears the weight and the responsibility for this difficult conversation? It's all in him. Now, I now can choose one of these other strategies, right? I can either say, if we don't talk, we've got this, I can move to a competitive strategy. I can go to HR. He's not playing nice. I have all these other strategies. But when you understand this one, it actually is a faster way to get to an agreement with someone. Allowing for no allows for yes. It will make more sense when we begin to do some of these, hopefully, role plays, situations that you guys bring up. Okay? So, that's guardrail number 2. The third guardrail is what I call intelligent confusion. And my assertion is, if you can move from judgment and frustration to what I call intelligent confusion, and ask an open-ended question, it's like an excellent step for managing a difficult conversation. Intelligent confusion. Intelligent confusion has to do with asking open-ended questions. An open-ended question is a question that doesn't end with yes or no. And the best open-ended question that I can give you would be 3 little words. I have no idea what's happening. But I think I might have to turn this off. What do you think? Hello, 1, 2, yeah, it went off by itself. All right, so these 3 little words that my clients have used, I actually think I have turned it off. Don, you might want to just turn that whole thing off. I'll do something. Yeah. So, well, I can't get rid of it. I can't turn
turn off, so how do I get the battery?
Ben's got it.
Yeah, there's no way to. All right, are we,
Let's turn off the
Over
light.
there.
okay. Well, are we off or
No,
on?
I'll turn the whole thing off.
Okay,
He's pulled the plug on it.
we pulled the plug, so I don't even, so this is gonna work?
Again.
Nope, plug it. You don't plug it.
All right. So these three little words are really going to make sense. Help me understand. In this case, it's help me understand what's happening with these electronics. So help me understand is a quick way to get to intelligent confusion. And why that is important is that it's non-positional. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2. This light isn't on, so. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. I think we're gonna have to give up. 1, 2.
Try to get it, try to get it.
I'll give it to you, complaints. No, I'm hearing that sound coming. There's something in your system.
Alright, Ben,
Let's
plug
just
it in.
be with each other. All right, so this is how we're gonna do it. All right, so help me understand gets you to intelligent confusion very fast. In fact, it's so important, I do this with every single group. I want you to repeat after me, help me understand.
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 If you did nothing else after you left here today, that the next time you got frustrated, you said, help me understand, it would change your life, I promise you. Change your life. And here's how I did it. In 1985, when I learned this, when I was a young manager in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, is I would say, can you help me understand? I'd like a facial tick, because my internal dialogue is going, you're stupid, you're an idiot, you're blah, blah, blah. And here's what happens. When you say help me understand, you realize how confused you really are. And so I would say we had to get parts for the car wash. And I'd say, we were supposed to use Smith Jones, right? How come you didn't do that? And instead I'd say, so help me understand, what was your thinking, what were we talking? He said, oh, don't you remember we were using that new vendor? And I'm like, oh. And what happens when you do that, first of all, you keep yourself out of trouble because you don't make an evaluation, which is positional. You keep yourself out of trouble and you move to intelligent confusion and you begin to pull. And what I want to teach you is the pull strategies of difficult conversations. You're 5 minutes away. What do I mean by that? By 5 minutes away, think about it. How long did it take you to tell your partner today your story about the difficult conversation? How long did it take? Maybe 5 minutes. Now, let me ask you something. Do you think the other person in your difficult conversation could tell that story the way you tell it? No. And you know what? You can't tell theirs either. That's what happens. As we begin to positionally escalate, we move farther and farther away. They become an object. I tell my story. I get a lot of validation for my story. They get validation for their stories. We move farther and farther apart. Oh, I can tell it to the person next to me in 5 minutes. Imagine what would happen if that person, that difficult person that you just talked about, imagine if they came up to you and they said, hey, I think I missed something. I probably was confused. Help me understand. Tell me what's going on. What would you do? What would you do if they came up to you and said, hey, I really want to understand more. I think I was a little confused. Help me understand your side of the story. And they were really open. What would you do after feigning dead away? You would tell them, right? How would that feel to you? Pretty good. So here's my assertion. When I say you're 5 minutes away, you're 5 minutes away because nobody ever takes the time to listen to each other. We're constantly interrupting each other or going into here. So here's you. Here's the breakthrough in understanding. And you're always like 5 minutes away, right? Like 5 minutes. You're always pushing it out in front of you. It's always there. So the key is for you to say, help me understand first, and give them the 5 minutes to fully understand their side first. Then they're more likely to be open to you. I'm going to explain how that works when we go through the 7 steps. Does that make sense so far? Good. So help me understand, why do I want to, am I stupid? Why do I want to be, say that I'm confused? Well, let me tell you a story, true story, that happens in the United Nations. In the United Nations, the field level personnel, the field level leaders, you get to a place where there are a lot of organizations, a lot of agencies for the UN all over the world. There's UNICEF, there's UNDP, there's UNFP, there's all these organizations. And you can, after 10 or 15 years, rise to be a leader for one of those organizations. So where do you go from there? Where do you go from there is something called a resident coordinator. And the resident coordinator is someone who represents all of those agencies in times of crisis. So that means I have to deal with the rebel separatist leaders when they come into the office looking for reasons. These are not terrorists, by the way. Let's just make sure we clarify. But there might be like a potential threat of violence if they don't get their resources, so I have to be able to de-escalate and have to have really good negotiation skills. I have to deal with meetings with high-level government officials. I have to face down very intense media sessions, right? So, true story. Someone came to me, one of these people, and he said, and my job is sort of help them and coach them. So he said, I've been nominated for this role, and we have to go through a series of tests overseas, and I need some coaching. And he was the chief of staff of UN Peacekeeping. So we went through all the coaching, and here's the test. Now, Matt, you've all been in some tough interviews, right? Here's your interview. They fly you over to either London or Addis Ababa. They give you a briefing book this thick, and you have to stay up all night memorizing the data in this briefing book so they'll simulate the conditions on the ground. You wake up the next morning with a few hours sleep. You're really tired. You go into a room and they hire actors to come in. So it's a bunch of different scenarios. One might be a rebel separatist who says, "What are you doing in my country? What are you doing here? You are disgusting. You do nothing. You're paper pushers. You are nothing but bureaucracy. And by the way, they're very paranoid. Do you have cameras here? Are there cameras? And what are you doing educating women? You know that we don't think that women are deserving of education, right?" You have 20 minutes to negotiate a future-focused agreement with that person. Sitting in that room are two assessors with a piece of paper, and it's competency lists, and they're checking it off. In 20 minutes, if you can't, in other words, if you are too nice in those 20 minutes, right? Say if you're the romantic, "Oh God, I really know how you feel, Mr. Rebel Separatist leader," right? You fail. Right? Because your job is to get a real agreement so they understand this is our role, this is what we can provide, right? If you are too tough, you people don't really understand what our role is, you fail. If you're still talking at the end of 20 minutes, the assessors stand up and walk out of the room, you have failed. Next, after that delightful scenario, the next room is they send somebody in, and this is the second conversation we talked about, the one we're talking about now, performance feedback. You're given a little sheet. It says, you've just landed, and you have to give performance feedback to someone who's highly politically connected. In 6 months, you and he are going to be at the same level, but right now, you temporarily are in charge of him. And by the way, he's really nasty, but he's really good at his job, so he's a really good warrior, but he's really rude to his people. You have to come up with a performance plan. You got 20 minutes to do it. You imagine? Assessors are right. Third thing that happens is you walk into a room. Around a table, there are a bunch of actors who are antagonistic with each other. Remember the other conversation we talked about? Which is how do you manage and get results out of a group? So you have to, in 20 minutes, well actually I think you get about 30 or 40 minutes for that. You have to bring in the group, you have to calm the group down and bring them into an understanding and an agreement around a short-term, a medium-term, and a long-term strategic plan. And the fourth one, after all of that, after you've come up with that plan, with all your data, you now have to go in front of the press for a hostile media interview and give a presentation, and questions are fired at you. So, I've been doing that for about the last 4 years, and I've worked with about, I think I'm up to 26 now, and 70% of people have passed the exam. This particular guy, who has, remember what his story was? he was support role. He was chief of staff of UN peacekeeping. He said, I really want to take a leadership role and I want to pass this test. So he passed it. And a year later, he actually got a role. The role he got was he is now country director of the largest, most complex UN agency in the world in Kabul, Afghanistan. He has a $700 million budget he's in charge of. This is from learning how to manage difficult conversations. I happened, because we're connected on Facebook, I happened to see him on Afghanistan TV doing a press interview. Very intense. He was nailing it. I mean, he was Teflon. You know, it was like Ultraman. You know, he was just, it was amazing. And so, of course, I am him going, I'm so proud of you. God, it was really great. And he IM'd me right back and he said, are you kidding? I think about what we talked about every day would help me understand. What's my point? If it can help a guy in Kabul, Afghanistan, don't you think it might help you? But I know we have experts in the room, don't we? So let's look at the data around this. Every communication study says that on average, a certain amount of information is kept and integrated, and a certain amount of communication is lost. So if you would call out for me, communication study after communication study says a certain amount of communication is kept and integrated, a certain amount is lost. What do you think? Call it out. How much do you think is kept and integrated? Call it out.
20% kept?
12%, 20%.
5.
Who said 5? What's your name?
Pat.
Pat. 5% is kept. Anybody else have anything higher? 5, 12, anything higher than 12?
20.
Someone said, who said 3? Okay, all right. So, truth is, it's the old 80-20 rule that 20 to 25% on average is kept and integrated, and 75 to 80% of that content is lost. Does that make sense to people? That makes sense to you? Okay, then if you agree, if that makes sense to you, then when I say to you, if you can transform your judgment and frustration to intelligent confusion, think about it. All I'm asking you to do is be yourselves, because by your own admission, you are confused about what's going on around you, like 90 to 100%. Somebody over here, Pat here, says, oh, you know, like 95% of the time. I don't know what the heck's going on. Do you get it? It's the delusion that Dave was talking about this morning. We live in our delusion. One way we can get out of that delusion is to notice what other people are, but there's some little small aspect of it that we're missing. That's why it took you 5 minutes to talk to the person next to you, right? It took you 5 minutes to share that story, but the other person doesn't know that story. Okay, so we are confused. When you and this is why when you get into practice some of the principles, when we go through these principles like avoiding positional escalation, giving space for no, the magic of it is you move from an intellectual understanding of how confused you are. Like you all, I would say you all intellectually understand, and I know because you all raised your hand. You said, oh yeah, I'm 95%. I believe that. Oh yeah. Well, of course you were thinking about that, right? But yeah, I can intellectually understand I am 90% confused, or I'm 80% confused. I understand that. But you don't realize it. You realize it when you actually begin to practice these principles and you go, I really am confused. And when you learn how to be more Teflon, like the guy who now manages Afghanistan, when you learn these principles and learn how to be Teflon, your life will begin to improve. And instead of being here telling a story to someone next to you over and over and over and not being able to sleep at night, some of you, I don't want to do blanket coverage because we're all at different levels. Instead of being there, you begin to catch it down here. Oh wait, help me, oh I missed that. Oh, I get it now. Is this making sense to people? Good. So, critical to success, you want to always be authentic. This is not about being, a phony. And part of the learning is, how do I really be me in doing this thing? That's part of the journey. You're 5 minutes away, but it may take you a while to get to that 5 minutes. But practice will get you there. Authenticity is really important. And then the individual realization. That's what begins to happen. If you actually take, there are a number of different models. And I teach around all of them. The one we're talking about today, we're going to go over shortly. Okay? So, let's do that now. I'm going to go through the steps. And then I want to really hear some real life stories. First, we're going to go through the steps. 7 steps of performance feedback. So here's how I want to process this. I think this will be useful for you. I want you to think about that person. Remember, this is a situation where you have some authority. Sorry. Do you think it's time for a break? Why don't we take a break? We started at 1, it's 2, it's been an hour. You guys ready?
Sure.
Okay, 15 minutes and we'll come back. And then we'll do this 7 steps. All right. So this is where the rubber meets the road. Who has a situation they'd be willing to share with the group? Someone that either reports to you, you've got that situation, you have to give them feedback, you're not quite sure how to do it. Who'd like to share? Wait, just give it another second. Okay, great.
So if you delegated a task to someone, an employee.
So you have delegated a task to someone.
Yeah, but it doesn't get completed in a timely manner, or at least my perception of a timely manner.
Okay.
How can I proceed from there? And what kind of,
So first of all, let's give this person either a real or imaginary name.
okay, Kim.
Kim. Okay, good, Kim. So Kim has not, you delegated something to Kim and Kim has not come through. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And what have you tried so far?
Not much other than trying to understand why she hasn't done it, or repeated it. I repeat, can you get this?
Can you get this done? And that's not, so that's not working for you. You're repeating it to Kim. Does this sound familiar to people? You've delegated something, you've repeated it, Kim's not doing it. What is your style? Romantic? What is your?
Expert.
You're the expert. What do we know about experts? Experts avoid conflict like the plague. So in fact, you're trying to figure out like what's the right answer, right? Because you're the expert. Like what is it? What it doesn't make sense to me. I got to figure out why she's not doing it. And then you find yourself not actually possibly. The way you do it is you politely say, "I want you to do it," and she still doesn't do it. What do you think her style is? Well, let's show the group right now. When you think about it, does she talk fast or slow? She talks slow, okay. And then does she talk with more affect or less affect?
More.
So is she more of a relator / romantic? Like, hi, how are you?
Romantic.
She's a bit romantic. One thing we know about romantic when it comes to work is they like to do things one thing at a time. When they get overwhelmed, things start happening. But suffice it to say, we still want to have this conversation with Kim, right? What's one thing you appreciate about Kim? If you were to compliment Kim on something about her behavior, what would that be?
She's dedicated or loyal.
How do you know? What has she done lately that was dedicated or loyal, specifically?
Just a normal day-to-day work.
What is it? Does she show up on time? What does she do? So this is interesting because we want to move out of the realm of evaluation to description. So she's dedicated and loyal is an evaluation. But when you're giving feedback, it doesn't mean anything. That's why a lot of these programs are like, you're dedicated and loyal. So are you. Stop working after a while because I don't know what I did that shows that I'm loyal. So what has she actually done behaviorally? That's the shift. What has she done that to you speaks of loyalty? She's on time. She
spends extra time working on her tasks and.
She stays late?
To some extent.
How do you observe? So what does she do? What has she done lately that to you she spent some extra time on a task?
I think it's more the communication and the willing to work with you.
So she's willing to hear you out
Yeah.
because she's a relator / romantic. So your feelings are important to her. Maybe. At least she's willing to hear you out. She's not executing, right? She's not doing the task. All right. So then I want you. Can you play Kim in all her glory? Just be Kim?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. Now, one last question. What is the downstream impact of Kim not doing this task? So think. So what is the task you want her to do?
There's a delay in getting the task done.
What does the task involve?
Her making phone calls and getting some information that she's capable of doing that I
Got it.
don't do anything.
Here's what you need to do when you have these conversations. You begin to think to yourself, all right, what's the downstream impact of her not making these calls? My question to you is that. What is suppose she stops making these calls, doesn't make these calls, what then happens next, behaviorally? Who's affected by that?
I am, because then I would have to do it, or get to the,
Okay, now let's say you don't have time, if the calls don't get made, then follow it down the stream, what then happens? If they don't get calls, what happens then?
then it doesn't get done.
Okay, so then follow it. See, this is where we get stuck. We make it about us. That's why we get stuck. If he continues to do this, it's going to be positional escalation. If you don't do it, I'm going to do it, and that's why you're not having the conversation, because you can see it's going to be positionally escalate, which is why you're trying to figure it out and ask nicely, correct? So this is what you need to do. Downstream impact is very important. What happens if those calls don't get made? Who cares? I'm asking you.
I do.
Well, obviously it impacts more than just you and her.
Oh, the business.
Yes, it impacts the business. How does it impact the business if the calls don't get made?
The task isn't accomplished.
But, so think about who your clients are. I know the task is it that a sale doesn't get made? Like, think about the business. What's the impact on the business? This is the high-level thinking we do as leaders in explaining to our direct reports why they're doing what they do. People do things for reasons that make sense to them. At the moment, she's just got that you're asking him, and well, once you make it about him, it's going to escalate. So think downstream. What is it? Who cares? So the business goes downhill. Do we suffer profits? What is it?
The project that needs to get done will not get done.
Got it. And then who? So then who then? If the project doesn't get done, is there somebody upstairs that notices that?
Yes.
Who's that? Who and who is the boss in the room?
Yes,
Okay, great. Who's the boss?
right here.
Okay, great. George will begin to notice that.
Right.
Okay, good. So now we have a downstream impact, because I think if George begins to notice that, he's going to have a conversation with someone. Who's he going to have a conversation with?
Me.
Yes. And then who are you going to have a conversation with? Her.
Her.
Great. Now, Kim. So you be Kim. Hey, Kim, do you have a minute to talk?
Yes, sure.
Okay. So I don't know if you've noticed, but I've noticed that I've asked you to make some of these calls, and they just haven't happened. So help me understand what's happening.
Nothing, I've just been busy. I have to, I'm trying to get some other work done, and I will get to it as soon as possible.
Okay, so for you, you've been really busy, and you've been trying to get work done, and you're going to get to it as soon as possible. Look, I understand when you're really busy, and there's certain things that like take priority, right? So help me, what's your understanding of like why we do these calls?
I understand we want to get this project done, but I just have to get this other work done.
So no, I know you know we have to get this project done, and I know that you're busy, but I just want to make sure that we're both clear on it. Why do you think we do these calls?
We want to get this special project.
Right, it's a special project.
Estimates, we want to.
Right, and so we want to do this special project, and what happens if they don't get done?
The project doesn't happen.
So the project, then what happens?
And you'll get upset with me, or you will.
Well, forget about me for a moment, right? Because the last thing I want to do is make this about me and you. Because, you know, I mean, we've talked about this a couple of times, and I've noticed this, you notice this like not working?
Right.
You've noticed that?
Yes.
Right. So do you see what I'm doing right now? I'm sealing her defenses. She's running out of defenses, but I'm creating what's called the emotional container of truth, with help me understand and just repeating back what she says in her charged words. And that slowly begins creating what's called the container of truth. So for you, we've had this conversation and they're not getting done. So I want to stop and think, what do you think happens if they don't get done?
Nothing happens.
Oh, I got it. So for you, you think that if they don't get done, nothing happens. I can completely understand that why would you want to prioritize this special project when nothing happens? So can I just share with you sort of what I've noticed?
Sure.
Good. So what I've noticed is that the calls aren't getting done. And when the calls don't get done, here's what happens. Those people don't get contacted. And because I also am prioritizing other work, and I don't have time to do them. I mean, that is how I see your job. When they don't get done, then suddenly George begins to notice. And then when George begins to notice, what do you think happens?
Then you get, he talks to you about it.
Yes, he talks to me about it. And when George talks to me about what do you think happens then?
Then you'll come down on me.
Yes. So I'm wondering how you can somehow, so you understand the downstream impact, right? He comes to me. So what can I expect from you? I mean, because do you have a better sense of what might happen downstream?
Yes.
By the way, is this helpful to you, Pat?
Yes.
Why is it helpful?
because I can talk to her a little more.
No, but I mean, what we just did, are you suddenly seeing a new possibility for yourself?
Yeah.
Yes, you are. Right now he's an expert, so he's not going to get too enthusiastic about it. But he just had a breakthrough. And the breakthrough is, without getting positional, in less than 5 minutes, I suddenly helped her see the downstream impact. Now, she may still not do it, but what I've done is get you out of your head thinking about why you're doing it, or repeating it and getting positional, helping her understand the downstream impact. And now I can go the second time and say, you know, and so now I would say, so what can I expect from you? Like, how soon are you going to get these calls done?
I'll get it done tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Now I've got an agreement. What happens when we get an agreement? People want to keep their word. When people give their agreement, they want to keep their word. Now we've got the power of 3 working for us. Hey, Kim, so you got those calls done now? You know, I thought we agreed that you were going to get them done today. What happened? How's she going to feel? I used open-ended questions. She gave her word. She didn't do it. Think she's going to feel more motivated? Do you? That's an actual question.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So, but I don't want Kim to feel bad because I say, look, Kim, I appreciate you doing that tomorrow. Look, first of all, I happen to know that you're incredibly committed, and I've seen you spend extra time. It's just this prioritization thing, and thank you for understanding. So I'll look forward to hearing back how the calls go. Notice we've gone. Notice how we did that. We got out of our stuckness around this. It's all about getting unstuck. We helped her understand the downstream impact without getting stuck in positional escalation. We gave her a compliment so she's not left feeling like one down. And by the way, this is all strategic and it's not about being nice. I'd like to have someone else. I'd like to do one more of these. Is this starting to make sense to you guys? Because I will go through the steps with you. Yes, do you have one?
I have a question.
Ask me the question.
What is wrong with Pat going to this employee and saying, show me what you have ahead of this and let me prioritize it for you? Put this aside, and here it is, now give me this back by tomorrow.
That would be one
What's wrong?
What is wrong with that? So here's, because in one case there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're a leader, it's a bit of it's not that long of an explanation actually. When you become a leader, okay, the first barrier that leaders happen is that they move from being an individual contributor, which is let me tell you what to do, let me tell you what to do, let me tell you what to do, and you get to a point where you have to be able to pull results out of people. If I have to continue to say this is your prioritization, first of all, I'm going to set up that positional dynamic. Second of all, she's not going to expect me to always explain to her. One of the things that happens when you're a leader is you understand the bigger picture. How many of you, when you got promoted, suddenly noticed that all the people that were your friends before, when you get promoted, they suddenly seemed a little dumber? Raise your hand. They suddenly seemed a little slower. They suddenly seemed that they didn't get it. Suddenly you have to come to them and say, look, Brendan, I know we used to have lunch all the time, but this has to be done. Why do they seem so slow? Because when you move to a higher level, you see things at a higher level. Your job is to help them understand the downstream impact of their actions they don't understand. That's part of this process. So one of the reasons you do it is to help her understand and move to a higher level and say, oh, see, I get that Kim had no idea and didn't think these were important. And if I say, you just do this because I say it's important, now I'm setting it up, do it because I say so, that has a limit over time.
But he's also established his authority over this.
That's a great point. So one of the fears is if we do this, somehow I'll lose my authority. That is what gets you into trouble. You have the authority. By nature of the role, you have the authority. You only give it up when you begin to not expect results from people and you don't follow some of these things that I'm sharing with you. That's about pulling results. You push, there's pushback, it escalates. When you pull, these are all pull strategies, right? It's all a pull strategy. Other questions? I love real questions, please. Yeah.
This kind of references this whole discussion.
Yes.
Wouldn't you also, to the gentleman's point, wouldn't you also want to take into consideration, so originally he had said that she was a romantic or relator or whatever, so in that situation, wouldn't it be fine to then set her priorities for her as opposed to if she had more of a warrior personality that's going to react adversely to you organizing her tasks?
Same thing. You miss her understand. See, the key there was that we all learned for the first time is she has no idea why this is important. If I simply say it's important, do it because I'm telling you it's really important. Remember, she's missing 80% of the situation. You might have explained to her why this is important. She doesn't understand it because she's missing 80%. Rather than tell her, I want to get the words to come out of her mouth. You see what I'm doing? I'm pulling the words out of her mouth.
I think I have trouble sometimes with somebody who don't understand it's important.
Yes, and that's because you're.
I know it's important. How could they not think it's important?
Oh, that is a great question. Because 80% of what you're saying, they're missing some little piece of the content. So they're missing it. Instead of the words coming out of your mouth, you've got to get the words to come out of their mouth. You do that with open-ended questions. You're getting this, aren't you? It's making, some of you, it's like you're starting to get it. This is not about being nice. And this only took 5 minutes. It's pulling the answers out of them so they won't keep coming and tugging on my coat sleeve. Christine. They'll keep coming to you for the answers. Your job is to teach them to figure out the answers for themselves. How do you do that? This is one way to do it. Question?
So Kim is smarter than her boss.
Are we saying that that's true? Because that's very offensive to our friend
She's been
here.
asked to do these type of calls dozens of times. She's gone through them, and they have never produced any results that she's seen.
Yes.
So this doesn't seem like a big priority to her.
Correct.
Therefore, she doesn't want to tell her boss, you don't get it. So the conversation, you can pull this out. She's never going to be honest enough to explain it. I've done this over and over again, and nothing happens.
It doesn't matter. Do you know why it doesn't matter? Do you know why that doesn't matter?
I'm asking because I think we all have organizational people
Actually, but
like
this is a perfect example of the 80% being missing. Remember what the downstream impact was? What was the downstream impact?
We don't get any business. Well, we haven't got any business in 2 years.
No, that was part of the downstream
Okay.
impact. What was the other downstream impact?
I didn't hear it.
Yes, I know. The downstream impact is George sees it. George comes to me. He says, "Why isn't this getting done?" And I would say, "So Kim, what do you think I'm going to have to say to George?" And Kim's going to say, "Because I'm not doing it." The downstream impact is always what goes around. It's about the process. It's about how it impacts the team, and it always comes back to them. People do things for reasons that make sense to them. People do things for reasons that make sense to them. You're demonstrating that point, that she's doing it because for her, it doesn't make sense to do it. Right? She doesn't understand the downstream impact that George is going to start to get really ticked off because a special project
So the
is not
next
happening.
part of that is, and this is the organization where I work, George is such a nice guy, he never fires anybody. Because he doesn't hold anybody accountable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So I'm frustrated because you're not doing your job, but I know that he's not, we're in a cycle that we
that
can't
is
break,
it is
right?
possible. So remember what I said. These are not magic bullets. So you're trying to find every situation that's not going to work. What I found is that people who did this, turned their companies from $1 million companies into Inc. 468 and go to Afghanistan when they practice these principles. That's all I can say. Okay? All right. Anybody else want to do a reverse role play like that? Because hopefully you're beginning to see how this unfolds, and then I'll go over the 7 steps. Yes?
Okay, so I
You guys
have
working?
an employee, is it working?
No, I don't think it is.
I'll speak louder.
Okay.
I have an employee that doesn't report to me, but I delegated a task to her, and she knew, I explained as I was delegating the downstream impact. But when I came back, so the task was, you have, the one admin is leaving. She's the only admin that knows go-to-meetings. You have to learn it before she leaves.
Right, slow down. It's the,
Go-to-meetings, like setting up a conference call.
and what is her responsibility? Go to meetings?
She's set up conference calls for executives.
Okay.
So she knew the one admin was leaving,
Mm-hmm.
and she was the only admin that would know how to do
How to
that.
do go-to-meetings.
So she would delegate it. So she knew if she didn't learn it, and the next time an executive came and asked for a meeting, she wouldn't know how to do it.
Huh.
So she was delegated this before the admin previous to her left. I come back a week later after the admin left, and I said, okay, we need to go to a meeting. Oh, the girl never taught me. So this is a responsibility. She never, I guess, takes the responsibility for different things. She blames everybody else for why she couldn't accomplish something. It's never, she didn't go and find out how to do it. She didn't take it upon herself to finish
Yes.
that task. That girl never came to her and never taught her, so now she doesn't know, so it's everyone else's fault. How do you have that conversation?
So it sounds like the solution would seem simple to a lot of people in the room, like just teach her, right?
Yeah.
But that's not what's
No,
happening.
because
What's
it'll be
happening?
for another task and another task.
What's
It'll
that?
It'll be for different tasks over and over again.
That you'll keep blaming other people.
Right. So
Ah,
it's
got
not,
it.
it's not the conference call, it's the attitude toward the work.
I hear you. So
Okay.
this is, remember we talked about metacognition? You need to have a meta conversation with her. Because we need to steal that defense. How many times has she done it?
Like 10.
10 times. Okay. And what's happened between you and her? Has it gotten a little bit
So
intense?
she's more aggressive in personality if you get her upset.
Is she a warrior?
Well,
Or more of an
she's-
expressive flash?
Okay, so she's odd because she's aggressive personality, but she likes to be delegated things to do. She wants to be told what to do and instructed. She's not an independent worker, but she's aggressive.
Does she talk
personality.
fast or slow?
She talks fast. Makes a lot of.
And does she talk about herself a lot?
Yes.
Okay, so so the defense is different. So under your warrior, look at your 4 columns, just so you know. So the way warriors respond to conflict is they control. So write the word control. The way expressives respond to conflict is they attack. She's attacking.
Right.
And defensive. Because they're so full of themselves and it's all about me and you don't understand what this is. So they attack. The way that relators/romantics respond to conflict is they accommodate and then feel resentful. With relators, it's like they have a little list like this. And like you cross them, it's okay, no problem. They cross again, no problem. Go all the way to the bottom of the page, no problem, no problem, no problem, and then they explode. The analytical/experts avoid conflict like the plague, like our friend over here. Right? So just write that down so you understand what the defenses are. Okay, so now we know she's an expressive, she tends to attack. She also is not going to be the greatest listener in the world.
Right.
And some part of her knows that, so it's probably fearful for her to even learn these tasks because she's so caught up in herself, and she's got probably some self-esteem stuff. So she's defending like crazy. So we want to get through those defenses, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you would probably say, 3 times. You try to do what I told you, like. So what happened? You go through that. Now it's the 3rd time. What are the 3? Can you tell me 3 times you've done it? 3 tasks where she got defensive.
3 different tasks. Well, there was only one time she got defensive, and the other 2 times I said, okay, next time you really have to learn it.
Okay.
It's
okay. We'll just do the.
I would avoid her being aggressive because I know there's nothing going to come out of it. So I just want to keep the relationship, keep her. She likes a lot of praise, so I
Yes.
want to praise her because that's how I get her results.
And she's so right now she's controlling you because whether she's doing it consciously or not, she knows if she can do that, your response will be to be praised and be nice.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, she's got the upper hand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we want to just put a stop to that, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. So here's how I might do that. What is one thing she's good at, by the way?
That she's good at.
Yes.
She's very organized.
She is organized,
Mhm.
but it's learning of the tasks.
It's taking accountability or being resourceful to complete something. So
Okay.
if I
Let's
didn't
give her a
tell
name.
her, if I
Oh, sorry. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Jen, if I didn't schedule a time for the 2 of them to sit down, then it won't happen.
Yes.
She won't go ahead and find a time for the 2 of them to do that.
Got it. So hey, Jen, do you have a moment to talk?
Yeah.
So I want to talk to you sort of about how you and I are communicating. And I don't know if you've noticed, but a couple of times when I've actually come and I've delegated some tasks to you, and you notice that things got kind of a little bit warm between us. Like, you notice that?
No, I didn't know.
Oh, you did. Do you remember last week when we had that conversation and you sort of got a little bit excited? I know how to, you actually began talking a little bit loud. So you need to describe her behavior. What was the behavior last week when she got upset? Do you remember one word she said that to you looked like she got hot under the collar?
Oh, yeah, she said, no, she never taught me. She left. I don't know what to
Okay,
tell me.
so you remember last week when you said, no, she never taught me that she left.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed that, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but that's happened a couple of times. Have you noticed that?
Oh, no, I didn't know.
So you haven't noticed it?
No.
Okay, so what I have noticed that when I've given you a task, it seems like things, and I'm glad that we're able to talk right now, right? So help me understand, for you, she didn't teach you, correct?
Right.
And how open are you to learning?
Sorry, how old are
How open are you to learning?
Oh, I was ready. She just never came home.
No, I know you were ready in the past. My question is, how open are you to learning now?
Oh, I'm open.
You are? Okay. So now we could teach her. Okay? And then we have another time, because I think you've probably done this a few times.
Yeah, but I don't know, I can't remember.
Well, but what I'm asking you to do is sort
Yeah,
of track
remember
them.
Mhm.
What I want you to begin to do is to track, your HR people are telling you, track the behavior, right? The reason they're telling you to track the behavior is because you need to discuss the behavior so you can get to the power of 3.
But
So I-
shouldn't I speak to her a little differently? It's a little harder for me because she's much older than me. And I'm delegating to her, so it becomes an awkward,
You don't have to be rude. See, for you, what is your behavioral style?
I'm a romantic warrior.
Yes. So you're going to be pushed before you really hit hard, correct? But in the meantime, you notice you're being pushed.
Mhm.
So I might say, so help me understand. So help me understand, Jen. So for you, you felt like she didn't teach you.
Mhm, right,
Okay. And I noticed 2 weeks ago, the other person didn't teach you something too.
right,
So it seems to me there's a pattern here where you're feeling like you're not being taught.
right.
So I'm wondering how, when you think about that, how does that impact sort of your job?
Oh. It'll get me into trouble.
What's that?
It'll get me into trouble.
Why do you think it's going to get you into trouble?
Well, there's going to be an expectation from me to know this.
We just got there, didn't we?
Mhm,
You just had a breakthrough.
mhm.
Now, there are all these people in the audience who are thinking, well, I wouldn't do that. But you had a breakthrough in your head. You really do see it. You're not lying, right?
Right.
She just had a breakthrough. Now, what I'm going to say to you is, because all of you are going, well, I wouldn't say it that way, or how did that work? It's an individual realization that she just had. Each of you could have that if you brought in your situation, but let's try to explain what happened. Which is that she did not, what Jen didn't understand is the impact of what she was doing on her. Correct? And you as Jen just realized that, and I did that through an open-ended question. How long did it take? Was it under 5 minutes? Yes. Is this making sense to people? What questions do you have before I go through these 7 steps? Because I actually did go through the steps. You don't have to go through all 7, but you will find in your tough ones, you will need to go through all 7. Here we go. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about your situation. And on the back, do it quickly as we go through it. Write down what you might do with your person. Okay? Question?
Yeah, so before you have a feedback discussion,
Yes.
you should almost determine what type of personality they are.
I would suggest that. That's part of what we did this morning. Because you're going to know what their defense is. And I just had you write them down.
Right.
So now, when you have a metacognition, instead of being in the content of the conflict, you'll own the process. You see, every time I paraphrased her when she would say, well, I just forgot. So you forgot? Yes. The minute you paraphrase someone, it steals their defense so they can't say it to you anymore. And the more defenses they give you, the more you see. So it sounds to me like then you had a real problem with people teaching you, right? Right. They can't do it anymore. You're still in their defense. You surround them with what's called the emotional container of truth. What begins to happen when you begin noticing these 4 styles is you stop getting caught in the content and you start understanding the process. This is one of the processes, and it helps you understand and have the metacognition and the meta-conversation. So I want you to, as we go through these steps, think about your situation. And on the back, you see there's a little box there. You can write down how you'll do it with Frank, Charlie, Jen, whoever. So first thing, do it quickly, face-to-face, and in private. Why would we want to do it quickly, face-to-face, and in private? Why wouldn't we want to do this publicly, give them feedback publicly? Why? Right, and if we embarrass them, what begins to happen if they become embarrassed? And what happens, and what's their defense? Their defense is they either consciously or subconsciously sabotage you. Consciously or subconsciously, so always face-to-face and in private. Now, I'm giving you some sample verbiage here. Hey, Kim, I'd like to check in with you on something I've noticed regarding blank. Now, noticed is a powerful word. The reason notice is a powerful word, it's non-positional. If I say, something I've noticed, can they say, you didn't notice that? They can't, right? It's one of those words that is non-positional. So think about the person, write down, how would you say that to this person you want to give feedback to? One thing, hey, I want to check in with you on something, one thing I've noticed, write it down. Take 30 seconds, think about your person, and write it down. Where are you going to do it? Is it going to be in the conference room? Are you going to call them up? Is it going to be in person? Where are you going to do it? Think about it. Next, I see people still writing. The driver's already finished. And the analyticals are still trying to figure out, now which conference room would be the, this conference room, which is going to be better, it's warmer. Next, you're going to get agreement on the facts, the observable facts. What often happens is we are stuck in evaluations. Evaluations are we're telling our friends, you know, they have a really bad attitude. When I tell someone, John, you, John, have a really bad attitude, the reason that isn't very motivating to John is that John doesn't know what I want from him. What do I want from him? Do I want him to come in earlier, smile more, bad attitude? What does that mean? That's why we get in conflict. But if I say, John, do you remember when I asked you to do something last week and you told me to jump in the lake?
Yeah, very clearly. Yeah.
Is that an evaluation or a description? That's describing behavior. When you describe behavior, they don't have defenses. Now they know what the problem is. So how would you describe what this person is doing in behavioral terms? They left. Let's say, you wouldn't say, you know, you're really lazy, right? Instead, you say, you know, here's what I noticed. I noticed that I came in this morning and the doors were unlocked and your name was on the sheet as the last person here. So I wouldn't say you didn't lock the doors last night, because they'd say, well, you know, Sally was I thought was supposed to do it. I can get all these defenses. But rather, I noticed that the doors were unlocked and your name was on the sheet. What happened? You notice how that's non-positional and what I observed? Are you guys beginning to get the power of this? Because I know we're moving toward 3 o'clock. And when you're moving toward 3 o'clock, it's the low point in the day. And I'm hoping you'll stay with me here, because this can make a huge impact. So what is it that you noticed in behavioral terms? Next thing you're going to do, is anyone stuck on the behavioral terms? Do you understand the difference between evaluating and the describable behavior? Next thing you want to do is listen, ask questions, and paraphrase, and you repeat until the other person feels heard. Paraphrasing means you're listening for the charged words, and you're saying, oh, so you thought it was supposed to be A, B, and C. With no buts, no buts. Because buts erase everything before it. So you thought, so this is, it's hard for you to fill in, because you don't know what their thinking is. That's often where you're stuck. See, you're in your own sense, your own self, you're going, why don't they understand me? Why don't they understand me? Brendan understands me, and they're saying, so-and-so understands me. But we're in a state of intelligent confusion, thinking, you know, that they're doing it on purpose, or something bad. Next, you deliver feedback on the behavior, not the person and I message terms, which is, look, here's my take on what happened. I observed that the doors were unlocked, and your name was the last one on the sheet. So when that happens, then if the doors were unlocked, we've got about $1 million worth of equipment here. If someone were to just happen to come in and take the equipment, you know what Don's going to say, right? What is Don going to say? So now I start pulling from him. What do you think would happen if Don then came in and found the doors were unlocked? Who would he come to? Well, I guess he'd come to you. I'm pulling the words from their mouth. That's the power. Help me understand. And what's your understanding? That's why that is. So what is your understanding? I'm not getting in positional escalation. I'm asking this open-ended question. Then I'm explaining. So when this happens, What do you think happens then? So the impact then is Don comes in, he sees that the doors are unlocked, he comes to me, he says who, and I say, well, let's see, whose name was on the sheet? Whose name was on the sheet? My name, exactly. And one of the things I'm trying to do is to keep you from getting in trouble, because you know what's going to happen, right? So it would be ideal if your name's on the sheet, it doesn't matter if you ask somebody else to help you. What do you think should be the right thing to do? Once again, you're pulling from them. Obviously, they say, well, I guess I'll just make sure that I lock the doors. Right, and that's going to cause, and you articulate the positive impact. Of course, that means that we're going to stay secure, now it's not going to get in my case. So what can I count on you for? And you get what's a say back. It's important to get a say back. If you don't get a say back, here's what happens. Some of you have said, so you're going to do A, B, and C, right? And they go, uh-huh. You notice that when you give your direct report feedback? So I can count on you for that? And they go, uh-huh. What else would they say? But when you actually say, so tell me, so how are you going to handle this in the future? 8 times out of 10, they're going to say, so I go A, B, F, L, right? And they go out and they're explaining to you they're going to go out and they're going to screw the light bulb into the water faucet. That's your opportunity in that step to go, wait, no. A, B, C, D. Oh, got it. Okay, great. Because we're both confused, that's your opportunity to make sure you clarify, and then you finish with a compliment. Why would you finish with a compliment?
I've been asking the same thing, because I typically, when I'm having difficult conversations,
Yes.
I actually would start with something positive.
And some people do, and you can't start with positive. You want to end with positive. Why would you want to end with something positive? Because you can start with positive.
I think I need to do both, right? Like,
Yeah.
I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time on the project. Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yes.
And then move into my observations. And then at the end, again, confirm the understanding.
Yes.
And the agreement that you've made in the conversation. And then, thank them for their time. Thank you for listening.
So I would not do that. You had me all the way.
Until the end?
Until the very end, and here's
Okay.
why. You don't give them a compliment for listening. That's their job. You give them a compliment on something completely different. Why? Like I would say to them, and you know what? By the way, that other project you did when you did that PowerPoint for that sales, the graphics popped so much. I had 5 people come up to me afterwards. The reason you give them a compliment is because if they leave feeling one down, like I'm a screw up, you do that once, they're feeling bad. You do that again, they're feeling worse. Now you're starting to feel bad. One of the reasons we avoid these difficult conversations. So you want to end on a positive note so they feel like I'm an okay person. I'm an okay person. So, hey, by the way, this PowerPoint graphics really popped, man. It's great. Thank you. So when they leave, they feel like, oh, it's just that I screwed up A, B, C, D. So when you begin to practice this, here's why the guy in Afghanistan can manage a huge budget and a huge staff and deal with government leaders. Because when he gives feedback, it's a by the way. When you practice this, it becomes a by the way. It's no longer this painful task. I know you may not see that now. That's why I ask you to practice this. And suddenly this begins to be like, oh, it's just a kind of a by the way. You begin to lose a lot of the charge on it, and it becomes much easier the more you do it. Is that making sense to people? Hopefully, is this helpful? I hope so. Here we go. Here's what I want you to do. Turn back to your partner. And I want you now to go through the steps and share what you come up with. So you've made notes. You're going to find, I'd love for you to find someone of an opposite style, but since you already have a partner, it's quite all right. You're going to share your thoughts, and I'd love for you to role play giving feedback to that person. It's 3 o'clock. I think if we spend about 15 minutes, then we'll take questions. But here's the thing. Have you noticed I'm pretty good at this? If you get stuck, call me over. Okay? So make this real now for yourself and practice with each other. Share and practice. Question? Carmen. Finish with a compliment. Finish with a compliment. Yes. Come back. All right, here's my question. I have a question for the group. Here's my question. My question is, what do you notice in doing, like, what do you notice? Like someone, like, I had several conversations with people who suddenly went, wow, I see how we're losing a lot of money. And I see how, like, within a couple of days, I can completely turn it around where they're previously stuck in the places where I was, right? Am I right, the people I work with? So, I want to hear, what did you learn from doing this? Like, what did you see that you might not have seen before you came to know from doing this?
Help me understand.
Help me understand.
Skipping steps.
Right, because you noticed that, and then what was the step that you skipped? That was a great conversation we had, right?
Right. Get them to agree.
To get, not only agree, but get a say back. Because he said, you know, why would I compliment them and I think I just feel like really good and not do it? I said, that's a good question. Are you getting a say back so there's a clear agreement and they know and they've agreed they're going to do it? And he goes, no. And suddenly he had his breakthrough. That's going to make a huge difference in your leadership. Huge. Most people that practice this notice, if I skip a step, oh, that's where the money's going out the door, or that's why I'm suffering, or they're suffering emotionally. What else did you notice from your practice with someone else? Something you learned, something you saw you hadn't seen before.
The importance of the downstream impact.
Yes, you saw the importance.
So important.
It's incredibly
Explain
important.
that, make sure that it's understood.
Understood, because they don't understand. That's your job as a leader, to help them understand the impact, their impact on their environment. They don't get it. Once they get it, they'll stop pawing at you for answers. What do you get?
Because this is an uncomfortable situation, usually,
Yes.
the tendency is to talk more.
Yes.
Talk faster.
Yes.
And, that number 3 of listening and asking questions and paraphrasing is something you often forget to do because you're so determined to get from start to finish and get it over with.
Yes. Actually, here's what happens, and it also is what happens in marriages. It's why things escalate out of control, and it has to do with your limbic system. And when you're starting to make your point and get your position across, what happens is they start to, when you get your, start to ask the open-ended questions, so help me understand, what's your understanding? And they start to give their side, you suddenly interrupt. No, but that doesn't work, right? That's what happens. You interrupt and talk faster. The reason you do that is because the minute you feel that impulse to like interrupt, it's because your limbic system is saying, if I let them finish, I will be killed. You're right back with the. What's that? In some cases that may be true. In some marriages that may be true, or at least there's the fear of it. There's the fear of it. So don't allow your limbic system to affect you. And we can talk about how the limbic system works, because there are some new protocols for releasing the allostatic load in the amygdala that's turning out the chemicals. There's some amazing new research that's coming out about that. But I don't want to get into that. I first want to hear, what questions do you have? Because I see people got some stuff. Question?
Dave, as we're going through these 7 steps, what do we do in the event that one of the two gets angry, or specifically the other party suddenly gets angry? Perhaps not even your fault, my fault. The person is just mad and it's a bad time, and I'm on step 4. Do we?
Yes. So the great thing about the model is reversible. So whenever they get stuck, whenever someone starts to get angry, say, wait. So what's going on right now? I'm noticing you're getting really angry. What's happening? Then you paraphrase. See, the paraphrase creates the container of truth. So yell at me right now. Yeah, just how I sound.
That's so stupid. What you just told me, that's absurd. I'm not even discuss it anymore.
So for you, this is like completely absurd.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, like I can understand how what I'm saying might be completely absurd to you.
Don't patronize me.
So right now, you don't believe me?
No.
Right. So here you and I are in a conversation, and I'm trying to listen to you, and you don't believe it.
You're patronizing me.
So what is it?
I'm upset with the way you're talking to me.
So now you're upset. So one of the things I'm really doing right now is I really am confused about what's happening right now. And so I know it may seem like I'm patronizing to you. And first of all, I don't want to be patronized. You don't want to be patronized, right?
Right.
Right. See how I keep bringing it back and I keep getting a yes and a nod of the head? Because even if he says you use a technique, that kind of thing, as long as you move to intelligent confusion, which I did, honest confusion, they can't use the patronizing. And once you got it, once I did that, which is so, look, you feel patronized. I don't want, the last thing I want to do is patronize you. I mean, do we really want to be in a situation where we're patronizing each other? What, think of what you're going to say?
I'll talk to you tomorrow. I'm done with this conversation.
Okay, so I get you want to leave. All right, so let me explain to you. So this is a good story because I know that what he's expressing is like what happens if they feel like you're using a technique, right? That's what everybody's fear. So
Use the 3 words.
help me understand. If you're coming honestly from there, you can, but in marriage it's a little bit different. So, do you mind if I share this story?
No.
So when I got married, I had been studying, conflict management, I'd done all that work that I told you about. And so I thought, well, my marriage is going to go pretty well, right? Because I understand this pretty well. Well, the first thing you learn is you cannot be a trainer in your marriage. So the first time I, did this with my wife, and I was like, so honey, we were just got married, and if you've been married, those first 6 months can get kind of intense with those early conversations, and they can begin to escalate, and they can get pretty highly charged. And so I said, so honey, I really want to understand it. And she said, don't try those tricks on me. Don't you try those tricks on me. And so I realized, well, this isn't really going to work, is it? And I had to walk my talk, and I have to give the space for now. And this is a true story. I simply, rather than escalate up, I just kind of pulled back. I said, I'm sorry, what let men do? I'm sorry, the magic words. But I just took my time and let it go. I allowed space, because you can't force someone. So 6 months into the marriage, here is what happened. This is why the space to say no gives the space to say yes. 6 months in the marriage, we're lying in bed. Saturday morning, she wakes up, she goes like this. Okay, you can tell me one principle about conflict management this morning. One principle only. I said, okay, honey, I want to talk to you about this idea of positional escalation. She said, don't try those languages. No. Do you notice that sometimes when we get to have an argument, that like I start to get upset, you start to get upset, and rather than getting, going down, it starts to go up? She goes, well, I have noticed that. I said, that's what I'm talking about. And I'm wondering if when that happens, you and I can kind of take a step back. So I'm beginning to sort of like pull a little bit into getting into metacognition about the process. In marriages, you have to be able to get to the meta conversation, which is the conversation about it. You don't want to get stuck in the content, because in the content is positional escalation. You want to be in the process. So here's what happened. Over time, she slowly began to learn some of these principles until it was about 4 years ago. We're standing in the kitchen. You can turn around, she's right back there. My wife, hi honey, Kathleen. 4 years ago, we were in the kitchen, and I did not expect this. We're talking, and she said something. I said something, talking about our 2 clients. I work in very difficult conflict circumstances with executive teams, and you know a little bit about it, right? And we were talking a little bit about the dynamics. She goes, yeah, I can understand that, because it worked. But that was sort of before I learned how to manage difficult conversations. I was like, what? What? I said, can I quote you on that? Because my clients won't believe you said that, because many of them are in marriages and they don't think it's possible. So what I want to tell you is, please, don't live in resignation.
So can we hear her side of the story?
Yeah.
What do you want to know? What do you want to know?
Where did he go wrong?
He hasn't. No, nothing wrong. All good. I've learned a lot.
Yeah, the way we fundamentally is it what you said, Stuart? Like the way that we handle it's not that we don't discharge. Like we discharged on Sunday, right? Like we was like, it's not, but the way we resolve it happens a lot faster, and we're able to move to the meta conversation and go, okay, so how can we figure out, and then we come up with a plan on how we can now improve the relationship. And we are 9 years in, and I am madly in love with my wife. I'm the luckiest guy on the planet. So, but it's easy to live in resignation. So what happens is you begin to try some of these principles slowly, right? And you begin to kind of realize it. And then you'll try one, and then you'll try the other, and then you'll begin to see. And you begin to really get some skill around this. That is what I wish for you. Any other questions? Because I want to see if I have time to go through.
So I think I can do this in 10 minutes, and I think it's going to be important. So you understand why you're in resignation and what gets in the way. And it's some powerful new research that came out, and I don't think that I would be doing you any favors if I didn't go over this with you. So we are all the product of stress. Dave talked about stress this morning, and stress is stored in the limbic system, in the amygdala. And that all begins to get stored up. And it turns out that everything that happened to us in the past is always present. So if the minute you come down the birth canal, there's stress. It's an inescapable circumstance. And there's an impact, and the brain records it. If you didn't get on the soccer team, it's an inescapable circumstance. Your brain records it. It's an inescapable circumstance if you grow up and your family has less money than the families around you, and your brain records it. It's an inescapable circumstance if you grow up with a lot more money than people around you, and your brain records it. There's actually some stress around that. Oh, you're the rich kid. There's an inescapable circumstance the first time you gave, remember the first time you gave a public speech? How you felt? Remember how I felt? I was speechless. I was just like, couldn't even get the words out. So what happens? It turns out that anytime you perceive inescapability, something happens that causes a pattern. And this is how it works. It's just like tens of thousands of years ago when your ancestors faced down a saber-toothed tiger. So let's say the tiger shows up. Now we know, what's the response? What's the brain's response? We call it the fight or flight response. Here's what happens, because we all know that. The amygdala turns out noradrenaline, norepinephrine, everything you need to like fight or fly. What I didn't know is that at the same time that's happening, underneath the amygdala, the hippocampus is recording all the data around the event. Right? It's recording the color of the sky. It's recording the shape of the trees. And that's so that the next time you were to come into the forest, your hippocampus would say to your amygdala, hey, this is where the tiger lives. So the same noradrenaline, your amygdala goes, oh, there's a tiger here, is there? The amygdala thinks the tiger is there. So the same fight or flight response happens, but then you go, wait a minute, your prefrontal cortex goes, wait, pal, hold on, there's no tiger here. Okay. Why is that important? Because in modern times, if your uncle screamed at you and you were frightened and your uncle had a big nose, your hippocampus recorded the big nose so that now big-nosed people are going to have an impact on you because that pattern is locked in here. If your mom once yelled at you in a yellow room, that's going to impact you. If you grew up in poor circumstances, that's going to lead to a continuing pattern. And this pattern is called repetition compulsion. Repetition compulsion. If you're in YPO, you know what repetition compulsion is. We talk about it like this. Repetition compulsion is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. What do we call that? Insanity. Yes, it's not insanity, actually. It's your brain's way of coping with stress in a particular pattern. Because you learned how to fight or fly. But the problem is, when you do that over time, you develop these pattern defenses, which is why you're living in resignation. Okay, that's the bad news. It's why you keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Because we are creatures of evolution, and your amygdala is saying to you, this time you're going to prevail. This time you're going to prevail. That's why sometimes you see people in abusive relationships keep going back. Because the underlying thing is, this time I'm going to make it work. So, anytime an event is encoded as an inescapable memory, it can produce this repetitive compulsion. What I want to share with you is a recent breakthrough. We won't have time to go through it, but I want to give you the link to begin to learn about it. There's a book out called When the Past is Always Present, and it's written by a doctor, not even a psychologist, but it's a doctor who got his PhD in organic chemistry, taught at Harvard, then he got his MD. He's had a very successful practice as an internist. And he figured out a process for freeing you from that chemical pattern. It's called havening, which means creating safety. So it had a really big impact for me.
So then I went and got certified in it. And I went out and started doing it with some friends. So I had a friend, let's call him the impatient father. And he was someone who noticed that because he had a very early memory of yelling at his mom, and he had this really nice mom, but in a fit of, I don't know, teenage angst, he screamed at his mom, never forgot it, found really guilty about it, and then noticed he was then screaming whenever that situation would be touched off by his teenager. Doing this particular protocol changed him, like he no longer felt. That's what happens, you know, all those unconscious sort of things happen. He didn't feel it anymore. Made a huge difference. Do you guys know what Vistage is? It's like YPO. I had a Vistage chair, and one of the people in his Vistage groups, imagine in your YP group, who he was friends with, committed suicide completely unexpectedly. For 2 years, he had so much guilt about the fact that I didn't see it coming. I mean, I'm a chair of this group, and my friend killed himself, and I didn't even see it coming. He could no longer sign new members. We did the process. Within 2 weeks, he had signed 2 new members because we had removed the chemistry. Third was the stressed out senior VP who said, you know, I notice whenever I get stressed out, my facial expressions begin to show it. And I kind of lose control. And she remembered a memory of when she was in school and her father would not come pick her up, and she'd sit there for hours and hours and wait in the school. And it had an impact, and she noticed the pattern. What happened after that was she worked in an industry that required an audit. And when the auditor came in, after we did this, you know, it's like 3 to 5 sessions for it to really begin to, sometimes you can have an amazing response in one session, but 3 to 5 sessions later, she had an audit. And the auditor follows her around for 6 days, like asking her questions, very stressful. And at the end of those 6 days, he came up, he says, I want to tell you something. I've been doing this for 15 years. I have never seen anyone be as calm as you. No facial expression. I'm sharing with you because this is something that is brand new. I feel that it is kind of a breakthrough. In fact, it's so new that just a few, when did it come out? Like a month ago? There's an article in a peer-reviewed journal about the impact of havening on depression, anxiety, work and social adjustment scores 9 weeks after the intervention. I just am saying that because I want you to kind of know about this. I really feel like it's something very important. I really think that this is something that could have an impact on your lives. It certainly has had an impact on the lives of my clients to help de-escalate that response, that unconscious response. Any questions about that? Okay, so first of all, it's been quite a day, hasn't it? We learned about behavioral styles, and we learned about what Hollywood hero would play us in a movie as a fun means of really learning about these styles. Then we learned how to recognize these styles, right? Then we looked at, what are some of the 3 things I can do? Okay, so positional escalation. I want to avoid, or start to look, when do I positionally escalate? And then I want to think, how do I begin to give space to say no? Oh yeah, downstream impact, I want to begin to articulate that. Right, I want to do that. And what we did today was move you in learning about these things from a state of unconscious incompetence. That state of where you didn't know what you didn't know about downstream impact, right? When you walked in here, many of you were like, I had no idea that I was this Hollywood hero in this way. Am I right? You learned what you didn't know today, some of it. What we did was take you from unconscious incompetence to a state of conscious incompetence. That's what we did. So now it's time to practice. And when you begin to practice and you begin to learn these skills, slowly you begin to see, oh, I see how I avoided that positional escalation. Wow, I saw how I gave space for now. And now you begin to get some traction. Over time, you begin to become unconsciously competent, where you're not even thinking about it. You're just saying, help me understand here. So you don't end up staying up late at night, because you did it down there. Right? That is the way we learn. Now people often say, wow, that seems like a lot. How do I practice this without seeming like a phony? So this is what I advise you to do. It's called the concentric circles approach to practice, which is you start with street vendors. And you say to the street vendors, hey, what's going on? How's your day going? Well, and you start to paraphrase them and see if you can get a nod of the head. See if you can hear, because someone's going to complain to you, right? I mean, conflict is the leading edge and bleeding edge of our lives, isn't it? That's the space of learning. You walk down the street, you're in the subway, what are people talking about? And then I said to Ha, this is what I said to Ha. And then I said to Ha, this is what I said to Ha. Right? That's the space of learning where we all are. So you start with the street vendors. Then you begin to practice with your acquaintances. And you get some traction there. Then you begin to practice with friends. Then you begin to practice with your family. And then you can go to your parents. Okay? This is a safer way to practice. So you don't go home and your husband or wife says, well, you obviously took a workshop today. But even if they did, you can say, well, help me understand what I do. It looks to you like I took a workshop. I'm genuinely confused. You can always go to authentic, intelligent confusion. So we started by saying that difficult conversations cost you by keeping you up at night, and they cost companies financially. What I'd ask you to do is to practice some of these principles so that you can basically start to get sleep as well as keep some of the money. Thank you very much.